Rwanda-Arsenal partnership to end money, tourism, and the politics of sports. Hello, and welcome to BAV Africa Now, Weekly Digest. I'm Amie Kallon. Tonight, we're turning our spotlight to a partnership that has taken center stage at the intersection of African tourism, sports diplomacy, and corporate branding, the upcoming conclusion of the 8-season collaboration between Arsenal and Rwanda Development Board, RDB, via its Visit Rwanda campaign, the announcement. In a joint statement on Wednesday, 19 November 2025, RDB announced that the Visit Rwanda Arsenal sleeve sponsorship deal will conclude by June 2026. The partnership began in May 2018, running across 8 seasons, The Guardian. According to RDB, the alliance has exceeded the original goals and showcased Rwanda's natural beauty while accelerating growth of the country's tourism industry. bbkigallfm.com. Visitor arrivals reportedly reached 1.3 million in 2024, with tourism revenues at about US $650 million, GRWF $941 billion, representing around a 47% increase since the partnership began. Arsenal CEO, Richard Garlick, described the 8-year journey as significant and marked by global awareness of Rwanda's tourism and conservation efforts.
English football team Arsenal says it will terminate its partnership with Visit Rwanda at the end of this season, when the brand will cease to appear on the Gunners' sleeves. The Premier League leaders and the East African Nations Tourism Board first joined forces in 2018 for a deal reportedly worth more than $13 million a year. But it's been a controversial partnership for Arsenal, with the team coming under fire over Rwanda's human rights record and its reported support for M23 fighters in eastern DR Congo. Visit Rwanda said the separation is part of a broader strategy to conquer new markets, in particular in the United States, where it signed a deal with the LA Rams basketball franchise. Arsenal said in a statement that the partnership had exceeded its goals of promoting conservation and sustainable tourism, and that millions of its supporters had been inspired to visit Rwanda.
Why this matters? On the surface, this is a success story. An African country forging a high-visibility link with one of Europe's leading clubs, gaining global exposure, leveraging sport for tourism and brand building. But when we dig deeper, as we do on BAV, several layers emerge. 1. Tourism and economic branding. Rwanda broke new ground by placing its Visit Rwanda logo on Arsenal's left sleeve, then on matchday LED boards, interview backdrops, and stadium branding at the Emirates Stadium, which itself attracts more than 250,000 visitors each year. The visibility for Rwanda was considerable. RDB's CEO, BAV Africa, stated that through this collaboration, the country drove awareness and visitation at a pace traditional campaigns could never match. 2. Soft power and sport diplomacy. Beyond tourism, the deal included youth training initiatives, Arsenal coaches traveling to Rwanda, youth sessions, conservation link-ups, and linking the branding of Rwanda with positive images in global sport. Rwanda thus positioned itself not just as a tourist destination, but as a sporting hub in Africa. 3. Ethical and reputational risk. However, the broader backdrop cannot be ignored. Rwanda has faced intense scrutiny for its alleged involvement in the conflict in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, especially its alleged support for the rebel militia M23. In early 2025, the DRC foreign minister publicly urged clubs such as Arsenal, Paris Saint-Germain, PSG, and Bayern Munich to sever sponsorship ties with Visit Rwanda, arguing they were complicit in sports washing. Reuters. Fan groups also protested. For instance, Arsenal supporters under the banner Gunners for Peace campaigned against the Visit Rwanda sleeve, The Guardian. So while the partnership achieved tourism and branding goals, the ethics and reputational dimension for both the club and Rwanda were in play. Africa-wide comparison. This case is not unique to Rwanda. across the continent and across Europe's top leagues, we see similar patterns. Rwanda's Visit Rwanda initiative also has deals with PSG, which began in 2019, and Bayern Munich, signed 2023, via the Rwanda Development Board. In August 2025, Bayern announced they would restructure their Visit Rwanda deal, shifting away from purely commercial branding to a youth football development focus, acknowledging the mounting scrutiny. AP News. For African countries seeking to brand themselves globally, sports sponsorship offers access to high-value platforms. But the Rwanda case shows the risk. If the host country is implicated in conflict or human rights questions, the branding deal can become controversial. From Ghana to Kenya, South Africa to Ethiopia, countries are experimenting with sporting engagements, football club partnerships, hosting international tournaments, leveraging diaspora audiences. But the key lesson from Rwanda: visibility must be matched by credibility. Tourism numbers tell one part of the story. The other is how global publics perceive the country's governance, human rights, and regional role. Forward-looking implications. What does the ending of this partnership in June 2026 mean? And what broader lessons should African governments, tourism boards, sports marketers, and African civil society take from this? For Rwanda, the end of the Arsenal deal closes a chapter, but RDB already signals a pivot. We remain focused on expanding that momentum into new sports and new markets, says Africa. The country will need each new deal to clear both tourism branding value and reputational risk. Future partnerships must perhaps be aligned more tightly with ethical, social, and environmental frameworks, rather than just logo placement. For sports clubs, Arsenal's exit demonstrates that clubs must weigh financial value against reputational cost. As global audiences become more sensitive to human rights, clubs will face fan pressure, regulatory scrutiny, and ethical assessments. The sponsorship sleeve deal is not just revenue, it is a public statement. For other African nations, the Rwanda Arsenal story is a case study. If you want to forge high-profile global partnerships to drive tourism and investment, you must ask, who are we in the eyes of global audiences? Are we ready for the exposure? Is our internal governance and external footprint aligned with the narrative we are promoting? Otherwise, you risk the sports washing label, which can spill over into diplomatic, investment, and reputational costs. For regional stability and diplomacy. The fact that the DRC publicly criticized Rwanda's sponsorships shows sport branding can become entangled in geopolitics. Sport partnerships that cross borders may prompt scrutiny from neighboring countries, civil society, international organizations. Sponsorships are not immune from conflict dynamics. For tourism and economic strategy, the growth in visitor arrivals in Rwanda from the partnership is impressive. But sustainability matters. Can Rwanda convert short-term boosts into longer-term infrastructure, inclusive growth and tourism diversification? And will its next partnerships bring deeper investment beyond branding, in skills, local industry, wildlife conservation, community development? Critical analysis summary. In many ways, the Visit Rwanda Arsenal partnership was a pioneering model, an African nation entering a global sports stage to accelerate tourism, build brand equity, and position itself as a continental hub. But it also reveals fundamental tensions. The trade-off between visibility and accountability. A country may gain global exposure, yet the same exposure exposes its internal governance and foreign policy footprint to intense scrutiny. The risk of print-only wins. High tourism numbers and revenues may mask structural challenges, economic inequality, over-reliance on a single sector, reputational vulnerabilities. The link between sport and geopolitics. Partnerships with European clubs are not only commercial. They have implications for diplomacy, regional relations, and international human rights perceptions. The need for forward strategic coherence. As Rwanda now pivots to new markets and sports, the next phase must extend beyond sleeve branding to deeper ecosystem investment, sports infrastructure, athlete development, community benefit, tourism value chain strengthening. Tonight, as we reflect on Rwanda's partnership with Arsenal and its broader meaning for Africa, tourism, and sport, the key question remains: what comes next? Will Rwanda harness this global platform to build a sustainable tourism and sports ecosystem that benefits millions at home? Or will it pivot to a new flashy sponsorship without the deep structural support behind it? And will other African nations learn from this, choosing partnerships not just for visibility, but for value, integrity, and long-term impact? As we follow the shifting landscape of sports diplomacy in Africa, Rwanda's exit from the Arsenal sponsorship opens a door to deeper continental questions. Who truly benefits from these global partnerships? Are they symbols of elite branding, or can they be structured to deliver grassroots impact? Let's unpack the next chapter. Beyond branding, what does Africa need from sports partnerships? If the last decade of African sports sponsorship has taught us anything, it is that visibility is not enough. The continent no longer needs branding without backbone. Rwanda's deal with Arsenal raised tourism numbers, undeniably. But from 2026 onward, African governments and corporate agencies must ask, how do we move from marketing Africa to building Africa? Most of the current deals, whether with PSG, Bayern Munich, or domestic African clubs, focus heavily on logo placement, tourism image enhancement, and elite public relations. That model may have been groundbreaking in 2018, but Africa of 2026 demands the next step: infrastructure and stadium investment, youth academy development, women's sports empowerment, sports medicine and training capacity, athlete scholarships, and exchange programs. These are frameworks that ensure the poor child in Kigali, Mombasa, Kinshasa, Lagos, or Lusaka benefits just as much as the tourism minister signing the contract. A comparative lens. What can Africa learn from Morocco, Senegal, and South Africa? Some African nations are already transitioning to development-based sports diplomacy. Morocco has invested heavily in the Mohammed VI football complex, one of Africa's most advanced training centers, now producing world-class players and attracting European scouts. Senegal, the Diembars Academy, co-founded by ex-players including Patrick Vieira, invests directly into youth talent development, not branding alone. South Africa shifted from tourism sponsorships toward hosting major sports events and building institutional sports systems, like bidding for the Women's World Cup. These models point toward a future where Africa is a producer of sports value, not just a buyer of Western exposure. Rwanda's Arsenal deal was a buyer model. The next step is becoming a builder and exporter of sports capital. Imagine, instead of paying Arsenal to market Rwanda, Rwanda could host Arsenal-level tournaments in Kigali with African broadcasting rights, African ticket revenue, and African talent recruitment. That is the kind of pivot the continent needs. The geopolitics of sports, Rwanda's lesson for the region. The diplomatic controversy related to Rwanda's alleged support of the M23 rebel group casts a shadow over the sponsorship debate. As flagged by Reuters earlier this year, this introduces a new reality. Sports is no longer politically neutral. Sponsorships can spark international pressure, as seen when the DRC government called on clubs to end Visit Rwanda partnerships. This geopolitical entanglement means African states must assess regional diplomatic risks before signing sports branding deals. Clubs, especially in Europe, will face greater pressure from fans and rights groups to scrutinize African government partners. Sponsorships risk being canceled not for financial reasons, but for governance and conflict reasons. In the future, clubs will ask not only, how much are you paying? They will ask, what does your international footprint say? What conflicts are you accused of? What human rights concerns surround your administration? Rwanda's model succeeded financially, but it shows that sports branding now requires ethical legitimacy. Africa's next big question: who will build the continent's own leagues? While African governments spend millions marketing themselves through European clubs, one uncomfortable truth looms. Africa still does not have a commercially dominant continental sports league. No equivalent of the UEFA Champions League. No unified broadcast empire. No billion-dollar merchandising ecosystem. Yet the continent has the world's biggest youth demographic, untapped broadcasting markets, some of the most skilled players globally, a massive sports-loving diaspora audience. Imagine if Rwanda, instead of sponsoring Arsenal, co-invested with Senegal, Morocco, Kenya, and South Africa to create a Pan-African club super league with global broadcast rights, professional salary systems, youth scholarships across borders, African-owned media distribution. This isn't fantasy. CAF has already hinted at such plans. The issue is funding, vision, and political unity. Rwanda's Arsenal experience may serve as a blueprint, but the next blueprint must be African-owned, African-producing, and African-profiting. Before we close tonight's broadcast, let's turn to the continent-wide implications of this turning point in sports diplomacy. If Rwanda's partnership with Arsenal has opened a window, then Africa must now decide what future it wants to see beyond that window. A future where the continent consumes global sports branding, or a future where it creates and exports it. Private sector and African investors, the sleeping giants. Africa's sports future will not be built by governments alone. The private sector, African banks, telecommunications firms, energy companies, entertainment conglomerates must play a role. For example, telecom giants like MTN and Airtel have massive reach across Africa. They could sponsor youth leagues, elite academies, and broadcast platforms. Pan-African banks like Ecobank, UBA, Standard Bank, and Access Bank could fund sporting infrastructure as assets that generate future value. African media companies, especially those investing in streaming platforms, could own broadcasting rights rather than letting Europe monetize African talent. If corporate Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Rwanda, Egypt, and South Africa decided to co-invest in continental leagues, Africa could transform its sports value chain in less than a decade. The question is, do African investors want to continue paying Europe to market Africa, or invest in building African-owned platforms that market Africa to the world? The role of civil society: demand transparency. As governments negotiate sports deals, African citizens must play watchdog. Why? Because sports branding can be a double-edged sword. It can build infrastructure, jobs, and tourism. Or it can become elite PR that hides governance failures. Civil society must insist on transparency regarding how much money is spent on sponsorships, how the impact is measured, whether communities benefit, how diplomatic controversies affect branding. Sports is no longer just entertainment. It is a tool of development and international influence. Citizens must therefore demand that leaders use it responsibly. Final word: advice to African leaders. African leaders must approach the next decade of sports partnerships with a new mindset. Invest beyond logos. Demand real developmental value: youth academies, infrastructure, women's sports, coaching programs. Balance branding with ethics. The world is watching governance, not just tourism numbers. Cooperate regionally. One country cannot build a billion-dollar sports economy alone. Shift from spending for visibility to building for profitability. Do not pay for Africa to be seen. Build Africa so well that the world cannot look away. Advice to African citizens. African citizens must hold leaders accountable for how sports money is spent. Demand development-based partnerships, not cosmetic branding. Support African leagues, athletes, and media platforms. Audience power drives investment. Speak up when sports diplomacy masks political or military wrongdoing. African sports will only serve the people if the people demand ownership and clarity. Key takeaways from tonight's report. Rwanda's Arsenal partnership increased tourism, but revealed ethical and geopolitical risks. African nations must evolve from branding deals to development-driven sports investments. The future of African sports lies in infrastructure, youth development, and continental leagues. Private African investors and media are essential to building a sustainable sports economy. Transparency and ethics must guide future sports diplomacy. Africa stands at a crossroads. Will countries continue paying Europe to tell Africa's story, or will we write it ourselves on African fields, with African-owned leagues, African-owned media, and African youth at the center? That choice belongs to governments, private investors, and yes, to you, the citizens watching tonight. As Rwanda prepares to walk away from Arsenal in June 2026, Africa must decide whether we will keep paying Europe to market us or build powerful sports industries of our own. Here on The Bold African Voice, we believe Africa deserves partnerships that build, not just brand. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and click the bell icon so you never miss bold, African-focused analysis. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay bold for Africa.